What's up guys, it's Lee here from Blue Top Productions, and today I'm bringing you a new KHADOR Tactics video. This video series is for the guys and girls who are just starting their armies off in the KHADOR faction in the game Warmachine. In this video series, we will take an in-depth look at warcasters, solos, units, and warjacks of the KHADOR faction. Remember guys, this is an ongoing series on my channel and we have already covered some of the KHADORian faction. So far we have covered Epic Sorcerer, the Spriggan and the Manhunter. And today we are going to be covering the Behemoth. This by far is one of the most feared warjacks in the game of Warmachine, I believe. This beast of a model is, how should we say, a Mack truck, because if it hits something, it has a slight chance of wrecking it. Before we get into the meat of this episode, let's hear some of the backstory to this heavy warjack. Standing nearly 17 feet high and carrying some of the most destructive weapons available to the motherland, the Behemoth strides at the vanguard of the KHADORian Empire. The incredible effort and determination put into this unique machine make it the mechanical embodiment of KHADOR. The Behemoth is as much a symbol of the KHADORian people, of their power and their imminent victory, as it is a force of destruction to all who stand against them. And if you want to find anything else about the Behemoth guys, you can always look in the army book provided by Privateer Press. But anyway, moving on guys. With that being said, let's take an in-depth look at this warjack. Okay, the stats are as follows. He has a speed of 4, strength 12, mat 6, rat 4, defense 10, armor 21 and a command of 0. The speed is your normal speed you're used to with KHADORian jacks. The strength is again the same strength as most KHADORian jacks also. It's mat, as you know, as most of the other jacks as well. It is quite up there. The rat of this thing is the same as a destroyer, and the defense is going to be 10, so it's KHADORian standard. And he has an armor of 21, so that's one more than the standard KHADORian heavy jack. So let's look at the weapons on the Behemoth. First we have two bombard cannons. These are a range 14, rate of fire 1, AoE 3 and a power 14 blast. Now the Behemoth has two bombard cannons mounted to its shoulders, and these can be quite deadly. With decent range and power, if the shells hit what they want to hit, they can tear apart units and damage even heavy warjacks. Oh yeah, he has two of these guys, so you can shoot one at one target and the second one at another, or at the same target as well. This can be quite effective because the Behemoth can shoot even if he is in combat. He just gets a -2 to his ranged attack rolls, and he cannot target the models he's engaged with in combat. Also, you got to remember guys, the bombard cannons, yes, these have arcing fire, so just remember that little rule. And the second weapons of the Behemoth has to be his open fists. Yes, open fists normally aren't that special, but trust me, these are power strength 12, but both his fists are armor piercing. So basically, when you do armor piercing guys, you calculate damage from this weapon and halve the base armor stats of the models it's hit, and they have to have a medium or large base to actually do this. And then his weapons gain +2 on damage rolls against models with small bases. So you half the armor of medium and large bases, which is really awesome, but when you hit small bases, you only get +2 to your effective damage rolls. Now, if you think about this, guys, let's see an example. Most jacks are normally, say, armor 18, for example. So if you effectively hit, that armor goes down to 9, which is pretty awesome. And seeing his open fists are already power strength 12, you're already doing 3 points of damage before even rolling the dice. And if you charged and did this, that's 3 dice with a +3 on top of it. So it can be quite effective. And yes, like I said, he is a Mack truck. So with that being said, let's take a look at his grid, shall we? His grid is something special because most Khadorian jacks have, you know, a few boxes blacked out. This grid has no boxes blocked out. It has the full 36 hit boxes. It is absolutely brutal, and yes, he is a glutton for punishment, so that's why he'll be targeted a lot due to the fact that he has 36 hitboxes. As you can see on the grid as well, he has 2 S's. This is his subcortex. This is what we'll be covering now with some of the other rules that he has. So his subcortex, guys, is very simple. The Behemoth has 2 cortexes. One cortex to control his movement and his close combat attacks and stuff, and his subcortex is what boosts his weapons. So you've got to make sure that you allocate the correct focus to the subcortex to boost his guns and the proper other focus to his normal cortex. So that's what makes him very special, having 2 cortexes to balance out, you know, the 3 focus you can give it, but you have to make sure that you apply it to the correct cortex. Okay, now with that down and dusted, we have to move on to a new part of the show, which I love to say is tactics. And we are going to teach and tell you guys a little bit of some advice and tricks and tips with my good friend Marth and Neek and me. So I'm going to go first, and then it's going to be followed by Neek and then Marth. So guys, caster selection is key to whether you take this guy in your army list. Remember, he is 13 points, so that is a lot of points on a jack. So you got to think, he might work with most of the casters in the KHADOR faction, but what one does he work with amazingly, for example? So I'm going to pick 2 casters off the top of the bat, which is Epic Sorcerer and Karchev the Terrible. Epic Sorcerer is one of my favorite casters, as most of you guys know, and the spell Boundless Charge is pretty awesome because it gives the Behemoth +2 movement and Pathfinder, which is really useful for that thing. But the one thing I like taking the Behemoth with Epic Sorcerer is because of her feat. And remember guys, this feat does double damage over the armor value. So like we've already covered, the Behemoth halves armor, and most of the time is going to be already plussing up already. That gets doubled, and then whatever you rolled is doubled. It is absolutely insane. If you get it right, you can wreck a colossal. You can just do so much damage. It's fantastic. And with Karchev the Terrible, well, what can I say about Karchev the Terrible? Unearthly Rage is fantastic with him. Having the ability to have boosted attack and damage rolls, and your open fists being magical weapons, means you can hit casters or, you know, those pesky Crix solos or any Crix models that say, oh, I'm incorporeal, upset from magical weapons. So it's pretty freaking awesome. So, and also his feat is pretty awesome, allowing models to turn and face any direction before they're even allowed to move, and, you know, having the ability to charge and make power attacks for free and getting Pathfinder is pretty awesome, I'm not gonna lie. So I'm gonna hand it straight over to Neek, and Neek will hand it straight over to Marth.
Alright, so it is Neek or Sputnik or the Octavir, however you want to call me, it's fine. And Lee's asked me to talk a little bit about the Behemoth, the one and only real heavy warjack in the Iron Kingdoms. So I'm first going to go over some things that I like about it and some of the things that I don't like about it. So a big plus is it kills pretty much anything it touches. With the introduction of Colossals, it's changed a bit, but he's still pretty good against Colossals. Another plus is that the Bombards they're a very big threat. They can get up to 14 inches when he tramples or charges. That could go even further. They aren't that accurate though, which is one of the minor problems I have with the Behemoth. And then there is his mat of 6, which is, for a character jack, it's a bit low. Most other character jacks have at least a mat of 7. And lastly, there is his biggest problem in my eyes. It's his very predictable threat range of 7.5 inches, which probably doesn't out-threat any of the models that you actually want him to get onto. So what I have done is I've chosen a few warcasters that either complement his strengths or cover his weaknesses in some way or another. Starting off with, maybe it sounds a bit strange, but Urusk 1 or Commandant Urusk. It might be a little bit of a strange choice because he's normally considered to be a very much infantry support caster. However, you need to spend those jack points, right? I like him with Behemoth because of his great spell Superiority. Superiority gives him +2 speed, defense, and Mat is Mat and speed being the most important ones. Defense, it's nice as it gets him up to 12, which means that he's into the reach of where you don't want to miss with the Mat 6 model. More on that later. So Mat 6 +2 becomes Mat 8, which is very reliable. You won't have to boost near as often. Never really against heavies, and maybe sometimes against infantry, depending on what you're playing against. Even though you really don't want him against infantry. And then there is the speed, which makes his threat range a very respectable 9.5 inch instead of 7.5, which actually out-threats many of the heavy warjacks unbuffed in the game. And it mostly depends on whether they have reach or not. When playing the Behemoth, I normally play him very backline, about the same height as my caster, most of the time a little bit further when playing Urusk, that is, as I don't like his low threat range. Basically, I wait until the late game before putting him into melee. In the early game, he's most of the time, or early to mid game, he's most of the time just a weapon platform. The 2 bombards are a really big threat to a lot of infantry and even some heavies. Long story short, Superiority just cranks this guy up to 11. From a very slow murdering machine, it turns into a less slow murdering machine that actually hits stuff sometimes. Next up will be Flat 1, or Flat the Dark Prince. To start off, Science Importance basically makes anything better because it's Science Importance. It helps him to hit, it helps him destroy stuff quicker for damage rolls, and it makes his guns more accurate as well. The most important thing is actually the combination of Boundless Charge and his feet. Boundless Charge turns his 7.5 threat range into 9.5, and then his feet turns it into a very, very scary 13.5 inches of POW 12 armor-piercing fists that just come beating the crap out of anything. Additionally, while shooting his bombards under effects of Science Importance, you can do serious harm to some heavy warjacks in this game. Especially when boosting the damage rolls, it becomes a pretty bad situation for some heavies. Lastly, we have the honorable mention for Butcher 3, who is not as good as the others in my opinion, but he's my boy, so he's had some interesting tech for the Behemoth. Mostly it's based around the spell Energizer, which at first doesn't look like much, mostly just a threat extender, but it has, in my opinion, 3 basic uses. Firstly, like I said, as a threat extender. So 3 extra inches of movement, that is before his charge, so you can get into positions where you do have line of sight to your targets. Makes his 7.5 inch charge into a 3 inch advance, and then a 7.5 inch charge, which is a non-linear threat range of 10.5 inches. You can also use Energizer as a way of still getting 3 inches of movement, but taking the aiming bonus. So what you do is you activate the Butcher first, then you Energizer, move the Behemoth 3 inches forward, and during its activation you let him stand still getting the aiming bonus, but getting from a 14 inch range into a 17 inch range. And then there is the way of using Energizer defensively, where you either walk up with the Behemoth or stand still to get the aiming bonus, and after shooting or even melee attacks you can move him 3 inches back to get him out of harm's way. Additionally, for Butcher 3, the Behemoth provides another target for your opponent's army, where your opponent will probably have to rethink their threat distribution. Instead of focusing everything on the Butcher, they also have to think about this Behemoth that's sitting there. That will take a considerable amount of work to get destroyed. Alright, that's it for me for this KHADOR Tactics video. Hope you enjoyed the rest of it. And you'll maybe see me in a video quite soon.
Alrighty then, Lee asked me to say something about the Behemoth. Now, I'm a Behemoth newbie, so I don't have that much information to share, but I think I can just give you some of the more precious pieces of an upcoming KHADOR 2014 article I've been working on regarding the Behemoth anyways. So, there's 3 casters I want to cover. First is Hakumi. Now Hakumi seems obvious, but the biggest thing he does for the Behemoth, in my opinion, is escort, giving +2 movement, thus amping up the Behemoth's threat range, both with his guns and, more importantly, with his melee, since the Behemoth is really predictable since it's a speed 4 heavy with no reach. Also, his feat gives you the option to have an insane number of shots from a single model that is not armed with a quad iron, since it allows you to have 4 of the bombard shots. Casting broadsides is 1. Hakumi then feeds. Behemoth activates, charges something, gets a free shot beforehand, and then, since you always get both your initial ranged and your initial melee attacks, you get 2 additional shots. That makes 4. However, those are power 14 blast AoEs, 3-inch AoEs, so it'll be interesting to see how well you can leverage that. But the feat gives +3 armor on top of that, combined with the full grid. That's very nice in keeping the Behemoth safe on a crucial turn. Second is Darkover, because she's rather tricksy, obviously. You can use Icy Grip to get to above the Behemoth, or rather his rat and his mat, which on a mat 6 rat 4 chassis can be very significant. Timed right, you can put Banishing Ward on it to keep the most ridiculous spells the opponent could use to stop the Behemoth off of him, but how well that pans out depends on the caster you're facing. And then you have Watcher. Now, Watcher is actually for protecting Darkover, but do not think that you can actually use Watcher to have the Behemoth intervene and then boosted attack, power punch, and opposing heavy into scrap before he kills Darkover. Now, the actual thing that I'm talking about is you position Darkover closely behind the Behemoth, so that when the biggest threat to the Behemoth comes charging in, it'll have to end up within 6 inches of Darkover. Then you trigger Watcher, and the Behemoth moves out. He will take a free strike, but that free strike is just as hard and not harder than the actual charge attack, and there will be no follow-up attacks on him. The last one I want to talk about is Darkover. Yes, that seems unintuitive, but hear me out. Darkover has not much he can do for the Behemoth, besides the feat giving him an additional +4 on his charge attack distance, which can be very significant. But I'm actually talking about Overrun, because with Overrun you can use that to position the Behemoth, so he does actually, with his speed 4, no reach, get the charge off on something. Seeing that Darkover has a technical weakness against Colossals, at least in my opinion, that can be very good, but with the Behemoth you will be leveraging feed and Overrun not for assassination, but for attrition. Also, the Behemoth can, since it always gets initial ranged and melee attacks, as long as the subcortex is up and running. He is a perfect target for Overrun himself, because he can punch something to death, Overrun somewhere else, hit it, and then start hitting other things while also getting his ranged attacks. Or you can use the ranged attacks to kill something, move up to the target you want to be punching, and just pummel it into the ground. On top of that, he does have superiority, which is, as Nick will probably have told you with regards to Prime Irisk, which is just good on the guy. So, a key question you always have to ask yourself also when it comes to the Behemoth and his 13-point price tag is don't always ask what can this caster do for the Behemoth, but also what can the Behemoth do for this particular caster, because with the armor piercing and the range and the bombards and the subcortex allowing the use of both at during the same activation, difference to say a destroyer or any other double duty KHADOR jack, that single jack can fix holes in your army's strategy. Not that I think that 3-inch AoEs are any good, but they're there. The power 14, if you can knock something down, that's really, really unfortunate for the knockdown target. But that is all I can think of for now. Rest will probably follow in the blog article on Calamity Research Labs lab.blogspot.com. And after that, farewell.
And so there was some tactics, tips and advice by Marth, NIEKS and myself, giving you guys a little bit of variety with the Behemoth. But before we finish this episode, I've got one more little bit before we go into the overall score of the guy. I want to talk about the playstyle of the Behemoth. Now, the playstyle can be quite tricky, I think, because, you know, he is such a key piece to your army. He is 13 points. That is a lot of points for your army, so playing him correctly is quite key. I like to play him sometimes as a weapons platform and then waiting just for the right time to make that great charge in and wreck house. But some people like to play him super aggressive, which I have no problems with, because you just get him up there, jam him into combat, and you know, he can take out a lot of punishment and he can shoot out of combat, so that's no problem. But he's just, I don't know, 13 points, it just makes me worry sometimes. So just be a bit, you know, be very careful how you play him. Obviously, if you're watching this, leave comments below. Tell me how you would play the Behemoth. I would love to know how to play him a little bit better myself. So guys, with that being said, we are going to move on to the overall score of the Behemoth. Now, I was going to give him a 10 out of 10, but being 13 points has given me, you know, a little bit of doubt of giving him the full 10 out of 10. So I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10 just because of the points factor. This guy is pretty much a jack you should buy for your KHADOR faction. This thing hits hard and it hits well. And you know, with the spells some of the casters in the KHADOR faction can buff jacks with, makes this guy a living dangerous threat. And guys, again, I want to thank you all for watching another episode of KHADOR Tactics. That's another episode in the books, guys. And as you've seen and heard, you're going to have Marth and NIEKS joining us now on these episodes. So you've got a little bit more advice and tips and some tactics for the pieces we'll be talking about. So guys, if you've enjoyed it, please hit that subscribe button on the screen. And hey, if you've liked what you've heard from Marth and NIEKS, their channels are in the link below also. If you want to check out any more Warmachine content that I do, why don't you hit that thumbnail on the screen to check out my channel. And guys, if you've enjoyed this episode so much, why don't you hit a like, leave a comment, hey, and if you've enjoyed it even more, why not subscribe? Until next time, guys, take care and have a good one.